Gearbits. This was a game that was sent to me on Steam, and it intrigued me because just taking a quick look at it, you've got mechs shooting lots and lots of bugs. My first impressions kind of felt like, hey, this is basically EDF meets Armored Core meets Gotcha Force, and I am all about that. Now, the end result is not quite that, and to be fair, this is a very, very rough around the edges game, but it's still a pretty fun one. Just be aware going into it, there's a few problems. The story to Gearbits is a little all over the place, like to a comical degree. It starts out simple enough. You are a member of a brand new squad of recruits going around this planet trying to kill all these bugs. That's sort of your mission. Easy enough to follow, right? Very quickly you learn that there are bandits and pirates all over this planet, and you'll have run-ins with them all over the place. Fair enough. Add some extra factions, have a little bit more intrigue involved. I'm down for that. But then very quickly something kind of weird happens. They decide to introduce this sort of spec ops team that gets sent your way, and they're higher up, so they're kind of taking control of the operations. The guy in charge is this military guy who's very by the book. At one point, one of your characters questions him in a cutscene, and basically he gets yelled at for it. And like, okay, fine, you got this like military higher up who's very full of himself, very by the book. Okay, fair enough. And then he kind of just shifts to weirdly comedically evil villain character with very little motivation. Without spoiling too much, his character is basically defined as being an entirely irresponsible and nonsensical control freak. Like I said, when someone questioned his orders in the middle of a briefing, they yelled at your friend. At one point, you get ordered to do something entirely sort of nonsensical in the situation, and by ignoring those orders, he basically puts you under military arrest and threatens your life. And for like the last quarter of the game, you're sort of wandering around following his orders under threat of death. And it gets taken to an absolutely bizarre degree when at one point he takes you onto a mission and straps a bomb to your mech. And he threatens to blow you up if you don't follow his orders explicitly. Your whole goal is to end up emptying out this mine that's being assaulted by these bugs because, you know, the whole thing is that they want to produce more materials to send back to wherever this guy is from and the key branch of the military he works for. He decides very early on that you have to carry a piece of garbage around with you the entire time that takes up a weapon slot, and if you drop it, he'll kill you. Okay, I get that he's a control freak, but this is a mission he needs me to do. One would think that he would actively not antagonize me so that I can do my job better, or, you know, not kill me so that I can at least get the job he needs done. The general guy even sits here and taunts you mid-level about needing to conserve ammo because you have one less weapon available to you, or else you'll explode. Yeah, that's real helpful in me completing this mission that's apparently of the utmost importance to you. Also, joke's on you, General Man guy. The slot I threw that junk in didn't have a weapon in it to begin with. And I was actually using my face Vulcans, which had unlimited ammo. They just do slightly less damage, so I'm at zero threat here. And I've got an unlimited ranged attack. Also, hold up a sec. I didn't have a weapon in that slot that level, because I was already at the weight capacity for my mech's frame. Game, I have several questions as to how my mech can operate heavier legally than it's allowed to. Or does junk just not weigh anything in this universe? Explain yourself, game. I'm sorry, this guy he's comically evil and he doesn't make sense. On this planet where we're getting assaulted by raiders and giant bugs, and that's the entire reason we're here, is to kill giant bugs so that, you know, people can colonize this planet, take back their refineries and whatever so that materials can get sent back home. He's more interested in just being in charge of everything to a nonsensical degree and not actually killing all the bugs. It's just kind of awkwardly written around this one character, and I did not care for it much. I did appreciate that, you know, we had extra factions to get involved with, and you end up fighting alongside them once or twice. It's interesting, and they do sort of establish some interpersonal relationships with some of your other crewmates to create a more complex narrative. That works pretty well, and in fact, there's actually a really cool system hidden within the menu that you might not even see. Let's you just take a break and talk to some random person on your staff, see what's going on in their life and what their thoughts on the current situation are. It's a small thing, but it does add a little bit. It's just the core story to this game is a little bit wonky and following a weirdly written character that doesn't make a lot of sense. Also, I just noticed this, but like in one of the missions, your allies are talking about how they need to destroy all these bugs. You know, fair enough, that's kind of the whole point. But the first thing they say is, well, we can't just bomb them because they're very unpredictable. But then in literally the next line of dialogue, they say, Unfortunately, these guys are very unintelligent, very predictable. Might want to have taken a second pass at that script, friend, is my suggestion. I'm guessing what they meant, you know, the swarms themselves are unpredictable, whereas the individuals are fairly predictable, I think is what they're getting at. But the problem is that they don't move as individuals, they're always as swarms. So yeah, I'm not sure how to really quantify this very awkward contradiction in dialogue boxes that happens literally after the previous one. Once you start a level, you go to the hangar and you select your mech. I believe there's something like 10 mechs, with the last one being a mysterious one that you have to unlock by jumping through some hoops, but it's cool and worth it. You only get to select one ranged weapon for your hand, even though you've got a second one, but you do get to select 2 backpack mounted weapons, which reminds me a little bit of how Armored Core works. Be careful though, you do have a weight requirement that you can't exceed, and that's decided entirely by your mech's frame. Unless, you know, you're carrying extra junk, which is just okay, I guess. It's also worth knowing if there are any target objectives that need to be ferried from place to place, it will take up a slot in your backpack that will replace a weapon until it's disposed of. Each of the weapons that you can get tend to fall into a spectrum of you're either shooting a lot of bullets at once, or you're kind of using a shotgun or some kind of explosive. There are flamethrowers though, and those are pretty satisfying. They take about a moment after it hits their enemy to actually impact them, but it does a fair bit of damage. And hey, you get a beam saber, and it's green. That's very Gundam Wing, and I approve, but some mechs actually just punch things to death, so you actually do have a little bit of visual personality with each mech in just their weapon loadouts. Then you get into battle, and this game kind of starts off with a fairly bad first impression, because the first level you get outside of the tutorial level is a defensive mission. And I get that that's totally a me problem, but I do not enjoy defensive missions at all. And unfortunately, there's a fair few of them in this game. Like, I would dare say at least half the levels involve you defending either trucks or sensors or some form of equipment that you have to just make sure doesn't get destroyed. Which, thematically, is a little bit weird, considering we're on a planet on the brink of destruction by a bunch of bugs and we have to fight back the bug menace. There's surprisingly little fighting back of the bug menace. Again, there's story reasons for the back half not really being about fighting bugs, but for the most part, while you do get to see, you know, plot reasons why bugs are ending up getting destroyed over time, you're actually taking part in very little of it, which is kind of just strange. In the levels themselves, it is primarily a third-person shooter that focuses very, very heavily on resource management. You'll have to manage your various ammo supplies, as well as your vernier controls. It's very easy to overheat your mech, and there's 2 different settings that your verniers can be set to, either a hover mode or a flight mode. And both modes have a particular enemy type that they're more advantageous to. The flight mode is more effective against bugs because they can't climb up on stuff, so you can just stand on top of things and shoot them, at least until they start introducing the ranged bugs. And the hover mode is particularly useful against going up against other mechanized opponents because you need that lateral evasive control. Otherwise, it's more or less just find whatever is moving and isn't you or one of your very dumb AI teammates and shoot it to death. And that's kind of the lot. It's not terribly complicated, and there's not really anything else to talk about gameplay-wise. It is very, very straightforward. One thing I did like, there are health and ammo pickups in the stages. Some enemies drop, some of them are just hidden in little tiny shacks you need to duck into to get into and find, but the neat thing is, in order to activate them, you have to attack them. However, you can use melee or ranged attacks, and what's interesting is once you've activated them, they are actually sort of mechanized spider power-ups that will follow you around and home in on you. So if you see one way out in the distance and you need some health, you could start shooting at it, focus on the enemy that's trying to kill you, and eventually, the little mech power-up health pickup will come and find you and heal you. And that's actually really, really cool. I like that a lot. But for the most part, that's sort of it. I've already kind of covered everything I need to say about gameplay. It is very, very samey over the course of the game, and I do worry that monotony will drag this game down for other people. A lot of levels do sort of devolve into defending missions or ferrying an item from point A to point B, while it takes up a weapon slot even though it doesn't weigh anything because physics. And there's a few levels that are just a straight up bug hunt, but not many. There are about 3 levels I would say that really stand out in terms of what you need to do, and it's usually for plot related reasons, but they throw an extra wrench into the works, which changes how you approach the level. Those levels are actually really fun just because they are functionally so different from everything else, and that they are trying to be different. But it just highlights how much of a shame it is that the rest of the stages feel a little bit too samey. The enemies that occupy these stages are likewise a little bit samey, and there's not all that much differentiating them. In terms of bugs, there are 4 types. There's the standard ones that just sort of wander around and attack you, doing passive damage if they get close. You run into laser bugs, which are the worst thing ever because they just do a consistent stream of damage to basically everything. There's bugs that look like they're covered in rocks and they shoot them like missiles that home in on you, but as we've established, this game and physics have a tenuous relationship at the best of times. And finally, there are rhino bugs, which just have a big horn. These will all be actively attacking things you need to defend, so keep an eye on that. But like I said, you're not just fighting bugs. There are plenty of raiders out there as well you can go after. They pilot mechs, and each mech that they have is more or less a variation of one that you have access to, although they do get these little spider sort of mecha bugs running around. Those are exclusive to them, and those are kind of interesting, but for the most part, if you've seen something you can pilot, the enemy can pilot it. It sort of creates a feeling of consistent believability in world because everything has access to the same technology, more or less. Occasionally you will fight enemy raiders that are effectively bosses, and these kind of ruin that believability a little bit because they have giant health pools that no one else has. What's particularly weird about them though is they have a health bar up in the corner that you can track your progress with. You know, like health bars are for. When you empty the health bar, it sort of refills, almost like in an old school beat 'em up where they just can't show the full health bar because it would be too big. And every subsequent health bar that the boss has seems to take longer to chip down, and it's more frustrating. And honestly, that creates the opposite effect that I think a solid boss battle should. As you go through a boss battle, you should feel more and more encouraged because you're doing damage, but here, you're discouraged because it feels like you're getting further and further away from showing at least that much visible difference in a health bar. The combat itself is fairly standard third-person action, although I will say it's very satisfying to blow up bugs. They kind of explode into a giant puddle of gibs, and reminds me a lot of EDF. Unfortunately, in about the 4 hours it took me to complete this game, the game crashed about 4 times. Once on a level completion screen, that did not save my progress. Not the best moment of the game. The AI is very dumb, and at one point I actually got into like this duel with this very high-powered super robot. I decided to go hunker into a little shed just to see if there was any health pickups and maybe formulate a plan outside the line of fire, and it walked to the entrance of the shed and then just froze and its brain shut off, and I definitely took advantage of that. An additional issue is that sometimes there was a fair bit of slowdown when there was too many bugs on screen or they were all exploding at once. I thought the game would have frozen at 1 or 2 points, and it felt like it had, then it picked up a little bit. It's a little sad to see these huge dips in frame rate, but otherwise it plays pretty well on the Steam Deck. There's issues in how this game plays. The AI is a little dumb, and it's a little bit hard to play at times. It's a little bit wonky, and it doesn't always work the way you kind of want it to, but it's not a bad game. For a game so rough around the edges, I'd still say it's a solid core premise, and honestly, aside from the fact I wish there was a lot less defense missions, I enjoyed it. The overall presentation to Gearbits is decent enough, but I want to point this out because I thought it was strange and it made me smile. In the options menu, there's a button for graphics. Not like settings for graphics, just do you want graphics or do you want no graphics? From what I can tell, all it does is change the menu to have less of a blurry background or not, but it's just weird that there's a blanket singular graphics button to me. The environments do look a little bit samey, and that's because there's only 4 or 5 of them. There is like one environment that only gets used once, which is kind of a shame, and it's probably the highlight of the game in terms of environments. The enemies themselves all look visually distinct, so you can at least tell at a distance what everything is, and if you need to pick out a specific enemy at any one point, that's not that big a deal. I do very much appreciate the mecha designs. I think my favorite one is just the commander type of the very first unit you get. It reminds me very much of the Nimbish Sturzen Gundam Blue Destiny 2. Respect this. This was easily my favorite suit in the game. But there are lots of different styles. There's bigger, chunkier suits that have more defense, and they do fall on a spectrum of ability, which is really cool. Audio-wise, it's a tad unremarkable, honestly. Like, I'm genuinely having trouble remembering any of it, honestly. And that sort of leaves the presentation in kind of a sort of neutral limbo. It looks decent enough for what it needs to do, and it sounds okay, but it's not that fantastic outside of the mecha designs. Now, if you want a copy of Gearbits on Steam, it is available for $13. I have to give a huge shout out and thank you to everyone's favorite color with 2 sets of repeated letters, Vermilion with 2 N's, for sending this to me. It was a lot of fun. For that price, yeah, I'd say it's decent enough. It's rough around the edges, it crashes a few times, and its story's a little wonky at the best of times, but you know what? This game's got heart, and it's a solid play. It's also worth knowing that apparently there's going to be expansion coming out, so that's kind of cool. And there's actually a side-scrolling shmup spin-off, and it's entirely free. And if you have save data from that, you can actually unlock the mecha waifus for this game. If you want mecha waifus, you've got a free game you can play and unlock stuff for this. And that's definitely cool. Gearbits is, at its core, not quite as quality as EDF meets Gotcha Force meets Armored Core, but it's a fun mecha third-person good time. And while it needs a lot more polishing, I think this is one to keep an eye out for. If you like mecha shooters and you've got a bit of tolerance for some roughness, this one's pretty fun.